Welcome to Watchtower History.
Now, did Eisenhower remain a Christian of some sort in his later life?
Yeah,
and if he did, what was his opinion about the Jews?
When I wrote this book that you have on Eisenhower, I had a hard time getting it published. So I sent several copies out to some group. I don't know which group it was, but I sent several copies out. And then they sent one to the person who did the foreword of the book. And then he read it and he called me up at the college and said, "You must publish this book. This is clearly true." A Goodpaster, General Andrew Goodpaster. And that's the only reason I continue to find a publisher, because he said this is just, he just really emphasized, you really hit the nail on the head. I've worked closely with this man for much of his life, and he was a very spiritual man. He gave me other examples, which I don't think I bothered to use because I had enough. But he said, "You must publish this book." And so I realized that the naysayers were wrong, because I'd send it to a publisher and they would say, "Oh, this is not true." I had one leading publisher that said, no, he was an agnostic. He didn't really believe in God. And in fact, at the Eisenhower Museum, one of the high-level persons there said he was not a believer. He was an agnostic. So he himself did not believe. And so I raised these issues with Andrew Goodpaster, and he said, "This is just not true." He's one of the most devout men I know. He didn't wear, and Eisenhower himself said this, "I don't wear my religion on my sleeve. I don't go around saying, oh, I'm a Christian and therefore I'm a good person." He did not push his own views, and therefore people were not aware of his views as much as they could have. People would walk in the room, the office at times, and he's on the floor under his desk praying.
Wow.
And Eisenhower would say, "Well, I'm praying now for various concerns, and just a minute, I'll be with you." And so that happened many times. In fact, he said, I have recorded in the book, where before major battles, he would pray, "Is this God's will? Is this what you want me to do?" And he concluded it was God's will that he would destroy the Nazis because of what the Nazis were doing. They were grossly violating his law, and it wasn't a war that, many wars, there are good reasons on both sides, but he felt there was not any good reason on the Nazi side. It just was not a good reason. And yeah, they needed more land, but they needed more land so that the Germans could increase in number and they could make the Poles slaves and the Slavic people slaves. And so it was all toward the lionization of the German people, which he had a hard time defining. There's a lot of stories of, in World War I, many of the Jews fought really very bravely. They got more wars than Germans did. They're more likely to die than Germans were. And a lot of leading generals, or several, I'm not sure how many, were Jews. And then later on, there was a concern, should this Jewish general go to the concentration camp, or what do we do? And so Hitler allegedly said, "I'm the one to determine if they're a Jew." And I understand Goering allegedly said that as well. "I'm the one to determine if they're a Jew." And so there are a number of Jews. I have a whole book on this. I haven't, to be truthful, read yet, but of all Hitler's Jewish generals. And so there's not one or two, there was a number which he appointed as generals. And so this is interesting. If they're racially inferior, then why are you making all these generals Jews, or making them generals?
And they knew what Hitler was doing with the Jews in the concentration camps.
Yeah, this is something that I think historians have tried to deal with, because here you're a Jew and you're in a high level position in Nazi Germany. Why don't you do something? And there are studies who have looked at that, and the best example, I think, is when Poland was conquered, and the concern was we need to separate the Poles that were too Polish and the Poles that were German background, because of course the Germans and the Poles intermarried a lot because the borders changed a lot. And so they had to determine whether or not they were enough German to say they're German and then not send them to the camps. And one of the generals in the northern part of Poland, who was ruling that area, thought this was ridiculous. So when they came in for evidence they're Germans, he just stamped the request automatically, everybody. And then he would say, well, you're German now. Congratulations. Go out and learn the language. You at least speak the language. And so he wasn't sending any that I understand, any of the Poles to the concentration camps. And then when the other rulers, especially what they call the general government, found out about this, they went to Hitler and said, he's just, he's rubber stamping. These are people that were half Polish and half German, and they should not be classified as German. And Hitler said, look, I appoint the guys to run the area. I appoint him to run this area. Let him run his area, and you run your area. Now go back and do your job and quit complaining to me about the other people ruling Poland, other German generals ruling Poland. And that's kind of, I read that Hitler was really kind of a hands-off guy. Except during the end of the war, he thought he could do a better job than the generals. And of course, started running the war himself and did a worse job. But by and large, he was hands-off.
We can see how that worked out for him.
Yeah. Didn't work out well at all. So.
You mentioned Eisenhower earlier, back to him again, and that he thought it was so important to make sure that all of this is very well documented. You said that he was a Christian. Do you know what his views on Israel were?
I think he was supportive of Israel, the nation of Israel. But I just didn't focus on that much.
Right. Those early Bible students would have had that opinion. So I don't know if that's what he would have carried over, or did he, was he just kind of neutral to it, keeping like the Rutherford view?
Well, Rutherford wasn't neutral.
Yeah, I don't think he was influenced.
As much as he claimed to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
He wasn't influenced by Rutherford. I think more than anything, he was influenced by the Bible, because during their family Bible studies, they read from the Bible, and you would read until you made a mistake, and then you'd lose that privilege, and one of the other brothers would take over. And so my guess is that his training was mostly basically reading from the Bible. And of course, back then, the Bible students adhered much more closely to the Bible with Russell's ideas, that they were more attuned to some of the biblical ideas, especially the need to be Christians, behave toward your brothers and appropriately, and so on. So those ideas at least impressed him more, although he was influenced by this chronology of the pyramid, Great Pyramid, and so on. And I mentioned the book where he was intrigued by that in Giza, that he saw this and what reminded him of the pyramid. A lot of people say that his dad drew that chart, but his dad did not draw that chart. That chart was done by the Watchtower, it's in Russell's books.
You're talking about the pyramid chart that was hanging in the Eisenhower family home.
Pyramid
came
chart
from the Watchtower.
Right. So that's so it's amazing when you read about this a lot. You find so many historians are wrong about what they claimed about Eisenhower. And that's one good example where they claim that David Eisenhower, his father, wrote that chart, but he didn't. He bought it from the Watchtower. You could buy large copies, 4x8, whatever.
Do you have any other questions, Paul?
I thought this was very interesting. I like. I was unaware that a couple of things that we talked about. I enjoyed the eugenics part, getting into that and tying it in with the discussion. Very good. Thank you.
I have one final question, though. As a Christian now, if you had one final message to leave for the audience, what would that message be that you really want to be remembered by, and what is the most important message to you?
Well, I would say the doorway to atheism is Darwin. And I got that when I was working for Madeleine Murray O'Hare. She said the doorway, I asked her why there's so much about evolution in the atheist journals. Let's talk about atheism. What are we talking about evolution for? And in essence, and she said, the doorway to atheism is Darwinism. So we bring people into the atheist movement by bringing them into Darwinism. And so that's why this is so important. I think we need the churches, this is what I'm doing basically in my apologetic ministry. We should help them see that evolution is not true. It didn't happen. It could not happen. The science is clearly against it. And therefore, it's a way of leading you into atheism, and it's dishonest. And we need to get that message in the churches. And that's what I try to do. But a lot of churches say, well, it doesn't matter if you're an evolutionist or not. You still, that's not the important thing. The important thing is the gospel. And there are a lot of people who accept the gospel who are evolutionists. Well, yeah, there are some, but by and large, evolution is the doorway to atheism. And so that's what I focus on now. And that's when I go out and speak in the churches. That's what I focus on. And I've spoken, I don't know, I can't really, about 500-600 different churches. And we'll be speaking next year in several churches. And so, but I need to get out in the churches, present this message. But on the other hand, is one half-an-hour sermon on evolution going to help these students be inoculated against evolutionary indoctrination in the schools? And that's a problem that you face. But I think churches should spend more time on apologetics. And I wrote the book, of course, Darwinism is Doorway to Atheism. And I take about 60 examples of people who were Christians, claim they were, and became atheists as a result of being exposed to Darwinism. In all these cases, that was the reason they became an atheist. And then I have another book, which Science is the Doorway to Theism. And that book shows these people became Christians through the study of science, that the heavens declare the glory of God. And if you spend enough time studying the heavens, the glory of God is going to be obvious. It's going to be there. And all these people became theists and Christians, most Christians, through studying the glory of the creation. And so we ignore this in the churches, and we shouldn't. We should spend more time studying the creation and realize that indeed that illustrates the creator. As we used to do, the churches in the olden days used to spend a lot of time on studying what they called natural theology. You went to seminary in the olden days and you'd study biology, and you study math, and you study geometry, and you study geology. That was part of your seminary education. And that's why at first, most scientists were trained in seminary. Most scientists were pastors up until about Darwin's time, actually, because that was part of the curriculum, because that is another route to God, is through the study of his creation. And I think we need to stress that in the churches, and with the young people especially. When I go out and speak, it's often to the committed. And so I'm not saying anything they don't agree with. They already agree with it. But I find people come there to my presentations because they want some information to help their grandkids who have become atheists. I was just in a church a couple of weeks ago, and 3 weeks ago. And I had several grandmothers come, and they bought my book called Apes as Ancestors, a big, thick book of 500 pages, very small print. I said, why would you, as a grandmother, why would you buy this book? I'm curious, because you're pretty much out of that book, because I didn't expect to sell that many. And they said, this is for my grandkids. I want my grandkids to read this. I want my grandkids to see the other side, because they accept human evolution, and therefore they accept atheism. So they're not for me, they're for my grandkids. And I've had many people say that's why they bought my books, for the grandkids. And so that's why my Apes as Ancestors book is doing much better than I thought, even though it's a doorstop, as they say, because it's a thick book. But I stress my chapters I wrote are really easy to follow. I have one on Lucy, and that's easy to read, and several others. So you can read those. But the other chapters, which are more dense, I had the authors write summaries so they could get an idea what the chapter said from the summary. So it's you need to get the word out. It's on Amazon and different book places, but
I remember at the BRCI conference, you described evolution as from the goo to the zoo to you.
From the goo to you by way of the zoo.
That's what it is. Thank you.
From the goo to you by way of the zoo. And that's really what they teach. It's not really mocking, because that's literally what they teach. We started out as goo, and we went through the zoo and became monkeys, and then eventually evolved into mankind from our monkey ancestors. In a sense, it's incredible people believe in evolution. And I'm talking about not minor changes like from the wolf to the dog varieties we have today. I'm talking about, well, from the goo to you by way of the zoo. It's incredible people believe that. But that's orthodox evolution. That's what they believe.
In our parting words here, what would be the books that you would recommend the most for those who are questioning evolution, or those who are questioning the inspiration of the scriptures, the books that you've written on the subject?
Probably my Apes as Ancestors would be on top, and my testimony in the book that you just showed. And there's one called Transformed by the Evidence, Persuaded by the Evidence is the other one. And those present my own experiences as well as those of others. So I don't focus so much on the problems. I don't focus so much on the evidence for creation. I focus on the problems with Darwinism. And I think the book on Hitler is one of my best sellers. That sold, I don't know, 20,000 copies or so. And that's in, I remember right, I don't know, several, 600-700 libraries. So that's been popular. And that shows you how the effect of Darwinism, which is one of my focuses, the harm that Darwinism has done in our society. And that's a good example. The other one that you showed is a good example as well, is shows how what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, how it wasn't all Hitler's fault. We've got our own share of blame. And of course, the main blame falls on Darwin, because he's the one who inspired this movement. And now, by the way, they're outing people who supported eugenics. And there's an article in Science magazine, the leading science magazine in the world. And the article basically said Darwin was a racist, period. And he was not only a racist, but one of the leading racists of the last century. Some may have supported eugenics and so on, but Darwin was pretty open in that there were inferior races, and the inferior races includes, among others, it includes the blacks and Australian Aborigines. And these he felt would go extinct because they were inferior, and therefore the gap between us and apes will become larger. And that idea has, of course, influenced eugenicists and many other people, as well as KKK. I've read a lot about the KKK literature and what they advocate, and they quote Darwinism in many of the books that I have read, especially the former leader of KKK. He quoted extensively why he became from a young earth Christian to a evolutionist and a KKK member as a result of his reading in college, University of Tennessee, result of his reading Darwin, works by Darwin and his disciples.
Anti-Semitism has seen a rise incredibly in the last few years. There are people out there claiming that the Jews in Israel today aren't the Jews of the Old Testament, that there's some other race. Have you ever heard that theory before? Or?
Oh, yeah, I've heard that. Well, I would say there's not much difference between those claims and the claims that Hitler made. I mean, the Jews, they have intermarried for centuries. They have stuck closely together, and that's a complaint about the Jews. They just don't blend in very well. And therefore, they complain on one hand, they don't blend in, they don't intermarry that much. They tend to marry other Jews. And then on the other hand, they say, well, they've intermarried a lot, and therefore there's a problem because they're Jews of the old. So you can't have it both ways. And my wife was checked, her DNA was checked by 23andMe, and they found she was primarily German, of course, and so on. But I think they found she was like 4% Jewish, which is Ashkenazi Jewish, which is significant. So they can, if they really want to find out, just do tests on all the Jews in Israel and find out what percent they are. And that shouldn't be too difficult to do. And they can determine whether or not they're really Jews or whether or not they're some other.
We can see the effect of what Hitler had done, and also the communists as well. My wife is from right in the center of Transylvania, Romania. It used to be a very heavily populated Jewish area. And most of those Jews are now gone. So they've now opened up and created a Jewish museum there in that town. And I visited that just a few years ago, right when it opened up. But there's very few Jews left in Romania these days. Both her parents are from some villages, and it would be very difficult to get any records. So I think testing is our only option to find out. So that's
23andMe does a good job. And I had mine done with several companies, and they all came up with the same result. So, or close, very close. So I don't, but curiosity, I think, and you could be tested, you might be surprised. And
I've been able to trace my genealogy back about 10 generations.
Oh.
So German, a little bit of French, Czech. So my wife would be a Czech mate, I guess you could say.
Checkmate, okay. You probably wouldn't be surprised if yours was tested here.
Good.
I was working towards that, so.
Yeah.
That's why he asked you the question to start with about 2 minutes.
Not that I didn't, but
set you up for the joke.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bergman. We
Well,
really
thank you.
appreciate
Good to be
your
here.
time.
Thank you.
And God bless you. We really
Okay.
appreciate
God bless you. I had a good time here.
Thank you all for watching. Like and subscribe. Leave some comments. Let us know what you'd like to see in the future. Get a whole story, not just from the Watchtower's perspective, but from all the various splinter groups. What were they saying? So until next time, keep reading.